𝑧𝒓𝒄𝒉𝒊𝒈𝒂𝒍. Across museums, private collections, and whispered legends, there exist objects shaped in the likeness of the human skull, and formed from one of the most enigmatic materials found on earth, crystal quartz. To some they are remarkable works of art, to others they are historical anomalies, and to many they are something far more difficult to define. The crystal skulls have been labeled as hoaxes, relics, spiritual tools, and symbols of forgotten knowledge. They have been debated by scientists, revered by mystics, and sensationalized by popular culture. Yet beneath every argument, one question quietly remains unanswered. What were they meant to be? We often ask who made them, when they were created, or whether they are ancient or modern. But rarely do we pause to consider a more subtle possibility, that their significance may not lie solely in their origin, but in their function. Quartz is not an ordinary material. It is used in modern technology to measure time, store information, and stabilize frequency. It responds to pressure, vibration, and energy. In many ways, it already acts as a keeper of data or memory, not metaphorically, but materially. So what happens when such a substance is shaped into the universal symbol of human thought, consciousness, and identity? Are crystal skulls merely objects of beauty and craftsmanship, or could they represent something closer to an archive? In this podcast, we will explore crystal skulls through the lenses of history, science, legend, and metaphysical inquiry. We will examine where they were found, what they are made of, how they were studied, and why they continue to provoke fascination across cultures and disciplines. More importantly, we will venture into questions rarely asked. What qualifies as an archive in the universe? Can memory exist outside of language? And is it possible that some creations are not meant to tell us something, but to hold something, waiting to be understood? Crystal skulls are carved representations of the human skull, made primarily from quartz crystal. Some are life-sized, others smaller, but all are striking in their detail and symmetry. They are typically clear, translucent, or milky in appearance, with smooth surfaces and carefully shaped features that mirror human anatomy. What makes them unusual is their form, their material. Quartz is one of the most studied and utilized minerals on Earth, and yet it continues to carry an air of mystery, both scientifically and symbolically. To carve these skulls in quartz has symbolized identity, memory, mortality, wisdom, and continuity beyond death. Unlike decorative skull carvings made from softer stone, quartz resists the hand. It fractures unpredictably. One mistake can shatter weeks or months of labor. This alone suggests intention beyond ornamentation. The crystal skulls vary in size and design, yet many share anatomical accuracy, high polish, symmetry that borders on mathematical, a presence that evokes reaction even in skeptics. Maybe the crystal skulls awaken only when perceived beyond the intellect. What they reveal is shaped entirely by the consciousness of the observer. Contrary to popular belief, crystal skulls were not uncovered through controlled archaeological excavations or documented fieldwork. Instead, most entered the public record through private collectors, traveling antiquities, dealers, museums, or purchases made during the 19th and early 20th centuries, a period marked by colonial expansion, romanticized archaeology, and an intense hunger for the lost knowledge of ancient civilizations. Several skulls are frequently, though often controversially, linked to Central America, particularly regions associated with the Maya and Aztec cultures. These connections are largely circumstantial, inferred through stylistic interpretations rather than proven excavation data. Other skulls surfaced in Europe, especially in France and England, where elite collectors and institutions were actively acquiring exotic artifacts at a time when myth, science, and spiritualism often blurred together. The absence of a verified archaeological context remains one of the greatest obstacles to understanding crystal skulls. Without a confirmed site, layer, or cultural assemblage, researchers must rely on fragmented provenance records, microscopic tool mark analysis, mineralogical testing, and historical trade routes to piece together their stories. Each method offers clues, but never a complete answer, and yet this very absence invites a deeper question. If something was never meant to be buried, if it was intended to move, to be seen, to resurface across eras rather than rest beneath them, would we even recognize it as ancient when it appeared, or would its true age be measured not in soil and strata, but in awareness, waiting patiently for the moment it was meant to be observed? The most renowned of all crystal skulls, the 𝑬𝒏𝒊𝒈𝒎𝒂 skull, is often said to have been discovered in 1924, emerging dramatically from the ruins of an ancient site. Yet surviving documentation tells a quieter, more complicated story. Records indicate that the skull was, in fact, purchased later at auction, its origin already obscured by the time it entered public awareness. This pattern is not unique. Numerous crystal skulls found their way into museums and private collections between the mid-19th century and the early 20th century, a remarkably narrow window in human history. Rather than appearing gradually across centuries, they surfaced almost simultaneously, as if responding to a shared moment rather than a shared culture. From a scientific perspective, this clustering suggests modern manufacture, likely enabled by advances in precision cutting and polishing techniques, and science may well be correct. But the deeper inquiry does not end there. Why did these objects appear during a period when humanity was fundamentally reshaping its relationship with reality itself? This was an era of redefined time, standardized clocks, global time zones, and the measurement of existence down to the second. Memory was being industrialized through photography, phonographs, and written records, freezing moments that once vanished. Ancient civilizations were being excavated, catalogued, and mythologized, while old religious frameworks were questioned, and consciousness itself became a subject of philosophical and scientific debate. Perhaps the crystal skulls did not rise from deep antiquity. Perhaps they emerged from a threshold moment when humanity, standing between myth and machine, felt an urgent pull towards something enduring, something that could outlast both belief and progress. If artifacts appear during periods of existential questioning, are they answers left behind by the past, or mirrors formed by the present, reflecting what we most fear losing? Historically, records point to approximately 12 major crystal skulls, those that have been documented, catalogued, analyzed, and debated within academic and museum contexts. Their existence can be traced through ownership histories, institutional archives, and material studies. Yet metaphysical traditions speak not of 12, but of 13. This distinction is not incidental. 13 is a number that has never belonged comfortably to systems of order. It exists at the edge, where cycles complete and something new begins. It appears in the lunar year, where 13 moon cycles quietly resist the symmetry of the solar calendar. It surfaces in transformation myths, where the 13th step is not continuation, but crossing. It marks thresholds in symbolism, doorways, initiations, moments where identity dissolves before reforming, and it is deeply embedded in death and rebirth archetypes, where endings are not conclusions, but prerequisites. Within this framework, the idea of a missing skull is not a claim of archaeology or a promise of discovery. It is a narrative structure. one that deliberately leaves a space unfilled. Narratives endure not because they provide answers, but because they preserve tension. They survive by pointing towards something unresolved, something just beyond reach, something that cannot be possessed, only approached. So perhaps the final piece of this ancient puzzle was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to be awakened, and perhaps the 13th skull is not an object waiting in the dark, but a role waiting to be assumed. The observer, the consciousness that notices the pattern, completes the circuit, and transforms the story simply by witnessing it. Quartz crystal forms over immense spans of time, born under sustained pressure and heat, far beyond the scale of a human lifetime. Its internal structure is not chaotic, but exquisitely ordered, atoms aligned in a precise, repeating lattice that remains stable across eras. Quartz does not decay in the way organic matter does. It does not forget its form. It remembers structure. This is why modern technology depends upon it. Quartz regulates time within clocks by maintaining an unwavering frequency. It stabilizes oscillations in electronics, ensuring coherence where instability would otherwise dominate. It preserves signal integrity, allowing information to persist without distortion. This extends beyond belief into the realm of physical reality. When metaphysical traditions suggest that crystals hold memory, they may be speaking in symbolic language, or they may be intuitively describing a property that science already measures, utilizes, and relies upon daily. The difference lies not in truth, but in vocabulary, which leads to a deeper, unavoidable question. If quartz stabilizes information, what kind of information might it stabilize when shaped with intention? Perhaps memory is not something stored like an archive. Perhaps it is something preserved through pattern, maintained by resonance rather than record. If so, then shaping quartz is not merely an act of carving matter, but an act of defining how information is allowed to persist. And if structure determines stability, what structures endure longest? Those created by accident, or those formed with awareness? Many who encounter crystal skulls report strong and often unexpected reactions. Though the experiences differ, certain responses arise again and again. Emotional intensity, sometimes sudden, sometimes profound. A distinct sensation of being observed, as though attention has shifted direction, heightened awareness, where thoughts feel sharper and the present moment deepens. A feeling that rests somewhere between unease and reverence. Skeptics often attribute these responses to suggestion or expectation, and perception is, undeniably, influenced by context and belief. Yet something curious remains. These reactions continue to surface even when observers are unaware of the skull's history, symbolism, or debated origins. The response seems to arise before explanation, before meaning has been assigned. From an optical standpoint, quartz is anything but inert. Light entering the crystal refracts internally, bending and redistributing along precise geometric paths. As viewing angles shift, expressions appear to change. Features soften, sharpen, or recede. Shadows move where none existed moments before. The skull seems to respond, and yet the object itself may remain unchanged. Perhaps it is perception that is in motion, subtly reorganizing itself in response to complexity it cannot immediately resolve. The mind seeks stability, completing patterns where clarity slips. If perception reshapes meaning, and meaning reshapes experience, can an object that consistently alters perception ever be considered passive, or does interaction itself give it presence, activating not the skull, but the awareness of the one who observes it? Today, most known crystal skulls reside behind glass, carefully lit, climate-controlled, catalogued, and labeled, Accession numbers replace stories. Interpretive plaques reduce complexity to certainty. They are preserved, but they are no longer engaged. Museums exist to protect objects from time, touch, and deterioration. In doing so, they succeed remarkably well. Yet protection is not neutral. By isolating artifacts from interaction, museums also remove the very conditions through which meaning often emerges: context, presence, and inquiry. An object once held, carried, or gazed upon with intention becomes something to be observed at a distance. Interaction is replaced with authority. Interpretation is finalized before the viewer arrives. This shift matters. Anthropologists have long noted that certain objects, ritual tools, symbolic artifacts, liminal forms, derive significance not from what they are, but from how they are used. When function is removed, meaning does not vanish, but it becomes suspended, frozen in a single narrative. Crystal skulls are rarely contextualized as experiential objects. They are framed instead as anomalies, curiosities, forgeries, or unresolved debates. Their placement tells the viewer not to question, but to conclude. And yet, the reactions continue. People linger. They return for second glances. They describe sensations not listed on the placard. This suggests something important. Preservation protects material integrity, but it does not guarantee preservation of meaning. In fact, meaning may require engagement to remain alive. Why does it matter that we continue to explore the origins of crystal skulls at all? At first glance, it may seem unnecessary. If they are modern creations, their mystery appears resolved. If they are artifacts without clear provenance, they can be catalogued, labeled, and set aside. But origin is not only about age, it is about intention. Understanding where an object comes from is also an inquiry into why it exists, who shaped it, and what role it was meant to play. When origins remain unclear, meaning remains fluid, and fluid meaning invites engagement rather than closure. In the case of the crystal skulls, the uncertainty itself becomes significant. These objects resist neat placement within historical timelines. They sit at the intersection of craft, symbolism, perception, and consciousness. To stop asking questions about their origins is not neutrality. It is a choice to limit inquiry, and inquiry is where understanding begins. When museums preserve crystal skulls as resolved objects, defined primarily by skepticism or classification, they protect the material while quietly discouraging deeper exploration. The artifact is stabilized, but the question is suspended. Yet unresolved origins do not diminish an object's value. In many traditions, they enhance it. Objects with uncertain beginnings often serve as mirrors rather than answers. They provoke reflection, curiosity, and self-examination. They invite us to ask not only what this is, but why it continues to affect us. So perhaps the question is not whether crystal skulls are ancient or modern. Perhaps the question is why humanity continues to return to them, why they persist in imagination, debate, and experience long after their material explanation should have ended the story. If we stop looking deeper, we preserve certainty. If we continue to ask, we preserve meaning. And meaning, unlike objects, cannot survive without attention. So the question becomes uncomfortable. Are we studying these objects? Or have we quieted them by enclosing them within certainty? Does preservation truly preserve? Or does it suspend an artifact in a state where it can no longer participate in the dialogue it once inspired? Perhaps the greatest loss is not what we do not know about the crystal skulls, but the kinds of questions we no longer allow ourselves to ask in their presence. History is not a perfect record of what occurred. It is a record of what survived, what was preserved, repeated, protected, and deemed worthy of remembrance. It reflects the values, priorities, and interpretive frameworks of those who did the recording, as much as the realities they sought to capture. Archaeology is clear on one point. There is no verified evidence that ancient Mesoamerican civilizations carved crystal skulls in the form we recognize today. The Maya, Aztec, and related cultures worked masterfully with stone, jade, obsidian, shell, and bone. Their artistic and ritual traditions were sophisticated, symbolic, and cosmologically precise. Yet crystal skulls, as physical artifacts, do not appear in the confirmed archaeological record. This absence is often treated as a conclusion. But absence is not always negation. Sometimes it is an invitation to look elsewhere. Skull symbolism itself is anything but rare. Across cultures and eras, the skull has carried layered meaning. It has represented the seat of consciousness, the place where thought, memory, and identity converge. It has stood for ancestral presence, linking the living to those who came before. It has symbolized transformation rather than annihilation, marking death as a passage, not an end. And it has embodied wisdom gained through mortality, knowledge earned through impermanence. The human skull is not merely an emblem of death. It is a container of identity, a vessel that once held perception, language, memory, and awareness. Seen this way, the skull is less about what is lost and more about what remains. So when modern artisans shaped skulls from quartz, they may not have been attempting to replicate an ancient artifact. They may have been translating an ancient symbol through the materials, technologies, and questions of their own era. Quartz, with its clarity, endurance, and internal order, becomes a fitting medium for such a translation, combining the symbolism of consciousness with a material associated with stability, resonance, and time. History tends to ask a narrow question: is it authentic? But authenticity depends on what we believe an object is meant to be. A relic, a tool, a symbol, a mirror? Perhaps the more enduring question is not whether crystal skulls belong to the ancient past, but whether they belong to a continuous human conversation about identity, awareness, and impermanence. If an object carries symbolic continuity across cultures and centuries, does its historical origin define its relevance, or merely the chapter in which it enters the story? And if meaning survives translation, then perhaps what matters most is not when an object was made, but why it continues to be made at all. Throughout the late 19th century and into the modern era, crystal skulls have been accompanied not only by debate, but by testimony. Collectors, curators, researchers, and private individuals have documented experiences that resist easy categorization, not as proof of the extraordinary, but as records of human response. Some accounts come from museum staff and researchers who spent extended time near the skulls. Others come from private collectors, visitors, or observers with no prior interest in metaphysical ideas. The commonality is not belief, but reaction. Individuals have reported sudden emotional shifts while in proximity to certain skulls, feelings of calm or unease without an identifiable cause, moments of heightened clarity, or the sensation that attention had subtly reversed direction, as though the object were not merely being observed, but participating in the encounter. In some documented cases, observers described visual effects beyond simple reflection, changes in perceived expression as lighting or angle shifted, depth where none was expected, an uncanny sense of presence that dissipated once distance was restored. Importantly, not all reports are reverent. Some individuals felt nothing at all, others felt discomfort rather than insight. A few chose to leave early, unable to articulate why. This range matters. True eyewitness accounts are rarely uniform. They are shaped by perception, temperament, and context. What gives these reports weight is not their consistency of meaning, but their consistency of impact. Even skeptics have acknowledged this. Several researchers who approached crystal skulls strictly as optical or historical subjects noted that prolonged observation produced unexpected psychological effects, heightened focus, disorientation, or difficulty maintaining emotional neutrality. These observations were often recorded reluctantly, framed carefully, and separated from interpretation. Yet they remain part of the record. It is also worth noting that many of these reactions occurred before popular myths had fully formed, before books, documentaries, or sensational narratives framed expectations. In some cases, the stories followed the experiences, not the other way around. This suggests something subtle but important. The skulls themselves may not be extraordinary in origin, but the human response to them appears persistent, and persistence invites attention. Eyewitness accounts do not tell us what crystal skulls are. They tell us what happens when humans encounter them. They reveal how perception shifts in the presence of certain forms, how symbolism embedded in shape and material interacts with awareness, how meaning can arise without instruction. What then has science done to understand how crystal skulls affect people? Direct experimental studies focused solely on crystal skulls are rare. Most scientific institutions have approached them as objects of material analysis rather than experiential impact. Testing has focused on tool marks, crystal growth patterns, and manufacturing techniques. Questions of how they were made have been conducted, not how they are experienced. Yet the human response has not gone entirely unexamined. Researchers in psychology and neuroscience have long studied how certain forms affect perception and cognition. Faces, real or implied, are especially powerful. The human brain is highly attuned to facial structures, even when they are abstract, incomplete, or artificial. This sensitivity can trigger heightened attention, emotional response, and a sense of presence without conscious awareness. Quartz itself introduces another variable. Optical scientists acknowledge that crystalline materials can produce complex internal refraction, subtle light movement, and depth effects that change with angle and illumination. These shifting visual cues can stimulate the brain's pattern recognition systems, creating the sensation of motion, expression, or engagement where none is physically occurring. In laboratory settings, similar visual complexity has been shown to increase focus, disrupt time perception, and heighten emotional response, even when subjects are unaware of what they are observing. Some museum researchers and conservators have informally noted this effect. Extended exposure to crystal skulls has been associated with eye fatigue, altered emotional states, or a sense of mental pull. These observations were not framed as paranormal claims, but neither were they dismissed outright. They were recorded cautiously, often without interpretation. This hesitation is telling. Science is well equipped to measure materials. It is less comfortable measuring meaning. The difficulty lies in isolating variables. Human perception is influenced by expectation, environment, symbolism, and prior experience. To study the effect of crystal skulls on people would require acknowledging that objects can participate in perception, not merely exist within it. And that challenges a long-standing assumption that objects are passive and meaning originates solely in the observer. What science has not yet fully explored is the interaction itself, the space where material properties, symbolic form, and human awareness intersect. So while there may be no definitive experiment explaining why people respond to crystal skulls, there is a growing body of scientific understanding that explains how such responses could arise, without invoking belief and without dismissing experience. The absence of a final explanation does not indicate irrelevance. It marks a frontier, one where observation, perception, and meaning overlap, waiting for questions science has not yet learned how to ask. These are not myths yet. They are observations, unfinished, unresolved, and deeply human, and it is from such observations that myths eventually grow. The crystal skull myth is not ancient. By all accounts it is modern. No verified pre-Columbian texts, carvings, or oral traditions describe crystal skulls as repositories of hidden knowledge or planetary prophecy. The familiar narrative of 13 skulls, scattered across the world, destined to reunite and awaken forgotten wisdom, emerges in the 20th century. It takes shape through explorers' accounts, esoteric movements, and later popular media. But myths are not lies. They are meaning structures. They form when a culture encounters questions too large to be answered directly, when symbols are required to hold what language cannot. While crystal skulls themselves lack ancient provenance, skull symbolism does not. Across civilizations and continents, the skull has been one of humanity's most enduring and consistent symbols. Far from representing annihilation, it has repeatedly been understood as a vessel of continuity. In Mesoamerican cultures, skull imagery signified renewal and cosmic balance. The Aztec Tzompantli, often misunderstood as displays of violence, expressed life-death cycles rather than finality. In Maya cosmology, death was a threshold, an essential transition within an ongoing rhythm of existence. Celtic traditions regarded the skull as the seat of the soul. Carved stone heads and preserved skulls were believed to contain identity and ancestral wisdom. To possess a skull was not to dominate death, but to remain in relationship with consciousness beyond the body. In Tibetan and Himalayan practices, skulls appear in ritual objects such as kapala bowls, symbolizing impermanence, ego dissolution, and enlightenment. Hindu traditions echo this symbolism through deities like Kali, whose skull garlands represent time, transformation, and the stripping away of illusion. Across Neolithic Europe, skulls were separated, preserved, and sometimes carved, suggesting that ancestors remained present through the cranium itself. In indigenous Pacific cultures, decorated skulls served as conduits of guidance and protection, bridges between generations rather than relics of loss. Even today, traditions such as Dia de los Muertos preserve this understanding. Skulls are not symbols of fear, but of remembrance, identity, and joyful continuity. The pattern is unmistakable. Across cultures, skulls consistently symbolize consciousness beyond the body, ancestral presence, transformation rather than annihilation, wisdom gained through mortality, identity preserved through change. Seen through this lens, the modern crystal skull does not invent new meaning. It translates an ancient symbol, and it does so using a material uniquely suited to modern concerns. Quartz is clear, enduring, and internally ordered. It resists decay. It stabilizes structure. In a time defined by accelerating change, fractured belief systems, and anxiety about memory and extinction, an object said to preserve knowledge outside the human mind becomes profoundly resonant. The crystal skull myth is not about skulls. It is about continuity in an age of impermanence. It is about fear of forgetting and of being forgotten. It is about the hope that something human might endure beyond collapse, beyond time, beyond us. If myths evolved to meet cultural needs, then the crystal skull myth fulfills a distinctly modern one: the need to believe that memory, awareness, and meaning can survive even when their creators cannot. So the question is not whether the crystal skull myth is ancient. The question is why it emerged now. And what does it mean that, at the peak of our own knowing, we began carving objects not to preserve the past, but to remind ourselves that we might already be forgetting who we are. Science approaches crystal skulls with rigor, and rightly so. Its role is not to preserve mystery, but to test claims, examine materials, and establish what can be known through evidence. When crystal skulls are examined under this lens, the findings are consistent and well documented. Microscopic analysis reveals tool marks characteristic of rotary wheels rather than hand carving. Surface polishing shows techniques that were not available in ancient Mesoamerica. The craftsmanship aligns closely with European lapidary methods of the 19th century, particularly those practiced in Germany and France. From a scientific standpoint, the conclusion is clear. Crystal skulls are modern creations. Case closed? Not exactly. Because science answers a specific kind of question. Science explains how something was made. It does not attempt to explain why meaning attaches to it. This distinction matters. Science can accurately describe quartz's physical properties. It can measure its piezoelectric response, the way mechanical pressure generates electrical charge. It can document its exceptional frequency stability, which is why quartz is foundational to modern timekeeping and electronics. It can describe the crystal lattice at the atomic level, where structural order remains consistent across vast spans of time. These properties are not speculative. They are observable, repeatable, and measurable. What science does not explain. Even as science measures, analyzes, and classifies, certain phenomena remain beyond its current reach. It cannot explain why, when some people stand before a crystal skull, they feel intense presence, or the subtle sensation of being observed. It cannot quantify why angles of refracted light seem to create expression or depth that shifts perception without changing the object itself. Neuroscience can describe how the brain responds to faces, patterns, or symmetry, but it cannot explain why some objects, like crystal skulls, consistently elicit reverence, awe, or disquiet across individuals who know nothing of their history. Science cannot yet articulate how symbolic form interacts with consciousness. How does a human mind imbue meaning into polished quartz? How does the shape of a skull, combined with clarity and internal reflection, awaken something that feels alive, without violating any law of physics? Nor can science fully capture the experience of continuity across cultures. From Tibetan Kapalas to Celtic carved skulls, humans have repeatedly returned to the skull as a vessel of awareness. Why does this symbol persist so deeply that modern crystal skulls can trigger echoes of ancient recognition, even if the artifact itself is recent? Finally, science does not yet measure the feedback loop between object and observer. We understand that quartz stores structural patterns and stabilizes frequencies, but what happens when the observer's mind resonates with those patterns? Can an object participate in perception rather than simply endure it? These questions are not failures of science. They are invitations, points where observation meets experience, and where the measurable intersects the immeasurable. Crystal skulls may be fully explained in terms of material, technique, and origin, yet their significance, the way they engage human perception, emotion, and imagination, remains a frontier science has not yet charted. Science does not define all reality. It defines what can be measured. But human life is shaped just as deeply by what measures us, by what draws attention, alters perception, and reshapes meaning without asking permission. Crystal skulls are not scientific anomalies. They are philosophical ones. If science defines reality by what it can measure, what happens to realities that measure us instead? And if an object is fully explained by science, yet continues to provoke curiosity, emotion, and reflection, perhaps it is not challenging science at all. Perhaps it is reminding us that reality is larger than any single way of knowing it. Now we arrive at the heart of the enigma. Across cultures and eras, metaphysical traditions have consistently attributed unusual qualities to crystals. They are said to store energetic impressions, amplify intention and awareness, interact with consciousness rather than merely reflect it. These claims are often dismissed as symbolic or poetic language, yet symbolism has always been humanity's earliest method of describing realities it could not yet measure. Interestingly, modern technology already relies on quartz not for decoration, but for precision. Quartz regulates time in clocks, stabilizes frequencies in communication systems, and preserves consistency in informational processes. Its reliability is not mystical, it is structural. This convergence invites a deeper question, one rarely asked without prejudice. What if memory is not limited to data, images, or narrative? What if memory exists as pattern? Pattern precedes language. Pattern exists before meaning is named. Every biological system operates rhythmically. Heartbeats, neural oscillations, circadian cycles. Consciousness itself emerges through repeating electrical and chemical patterns within the brain. Quartz is remarkable precisely because it preserves pattern with extraordinary fidelity. Its atomic lattice remains stable. It does not degrade easily. It does not forget in the way organic systems do. If consciousness is patterned, vibrational, electrical, rhythmic, then quartz becomes intriguing not as a container of information, but as a mirror capable of resonance. From this perspective, the crystal skull is not meant to function like a machine, not a hard drive, not a transmitter, not a database of hidden facts. Instead, its significance may be relational. The skull, shaped like the physical vessel of human thought, reflects humanity back to itself. It invites projection, interpretation, and contemplation. Meaning does not reside inside the object, it emerges between the observer and the form. In metaphysical terms, this is the function of an interface. An interface does not store meaning, it facilitates interaction. It creates a threshold where perception, intention, and awareness meet. Why we are drawn to crystals. Crystals captivate us for reasons both tangible and intangible. At a material level, they are visually mesmerizing. Facets, clarity, color, and light draw the eye, holding attention in ways that feel almost magnetic. Humans are naturally drawn to symmetry, geometry, and structure, qualities that crystals display in abundance. Beyond aesthetics, many report subtle experiences of resonance or presence when interacting with crystals. Some feel calm, focused, or energized. Others describe a sense of connection to something larger, time, nature, or consciousness itself. Whether or not these experiences are measurable, they are real in the sense that they alter perception, thought, and emotion. Crystals are also mirrors for intention. Collectors, practitioners, and meditators often choose stones with care, imbuing them with purpose, clarity, grounding, transformation, or focus. The act of selecting, holding, and observing a crystal can be a ritual in itself, reinforcing attention, awareness, and introspection. This human tendency, our innate draw toward ordered, enduring, and resonant materials, provides context for why crystal skulls hold such fascination. They are not merely large or unusual stones, they are shaped like the very vessel of human consciousness, a form that amplifies the symbolic and perceptual power we already experience with crystals. When we consider why people are drawn to crystals, the crystal skull emerges not as an arbitrary object, but as an amplified interface. It combines the physical, resonant qualities of quartz with the archetypal form of the human head. It is at once familiar, alien, and profoundly engaging, an object that reflects back to us both our curiosity and our desire to remember, understand, and connect. The crystal skull, then, may operate as a symbolic archive, not of stored knowledge, but of accessible insight. It does not speak, it listens. It does not reveal answers, it reveals the questions the observer is prepared to ask. And perhaps this is why the idea persists. If an archive does not hold knowledge, but instead awakens it through attention, presence, and intention, would we even recognize it as an archive, or would its truth slip past us, invisible, because it demands participation? Quartz is not ordinary. It is one of the few minerals whose structure interacts predictably with vibration. Every oscillation, whether from sound, energy, or human intention, travels through its lattice with remarkable fidelity. It resonates not randomly, but in ways that maintain pattern, coherence, and stability over time. This is why quartz powers modern technology, yet also why it has captured human imagination for millennia. It is both measurable and mysterious, grounded and infinite. Carving a skull from quartz is not simple. The stone is extraordinarily hard, far harder than any tool available in most pre-industrial eras. Every curve, angle, and expression requires precision, patience, and mastery. Small errors can fracture the stone irreversibly. The skill required suggests that these skulls are not accidental, they are deliberate acts of creation, works of both labor and intention, where human effort and material endurance meet in intimate dialogue. Modern technology has revealed yet more hidden dimensions. Digital scans and imaging uncover internal structures invisible to the naked eye, inclusions, natural fractures, and patterns embedded over millions of years. These details are not imperfections. They are the mineral's history, frozen in crystal. In a sense, every skull carries two layers of memory, the deep geological record of quartz itself and the human imprint shaped atop it. The influence of crystal skulls continues to ripple through culture. Replicas, both accurate and imaginative, appear in art, meditation practices, and modern myth-making. They inspire creative expression, ritual, and contemplation, extending the legacy of the originals far beyond museums or private collections. They are no longer just objects, they have become symbols, interfaces through which consciousness engages curiosity, awe, and reflection. These lesser-known facts remind us that the crystal skull exists at many levels simultaneously. Physical, a dense, enduring mineral shaped with extraordinary skill. Energetic, a resonant medium capable of patterning and interaction. Symbolic, a reflection of consciousness, memory, and human intention. Cultural, a living myth that continues to evolve, inspire, and provoke wonder. Quartz is simple, yet complex. A skull is just a skull, yet it is more. Together, they form a bridge between material reality and metaphysical reflection, between what can be measured and what must be felt. The deeper truth may be this: the crystal skull, in all its facets, physical, symbolic, and resonant, is less about what it contains and far more about what it calls forth in those who approach it. Every glance, every meditation, every story told or imagined becomes part of its unfolding memory, a living archive co-created between stone and observer. In this way, even the smallest fact, the quietest observation, can shift our understanding. Quartz remembers, humans wonder, and together they continue to generate questions that cannot be fully answered, but can always be experienced. Crystal skulls challenge us not because of what they are, but because of what they awaken. They exist at a threshold between science and symbolism, between craftsmanship and curiosity, between matter that can be measured and meaning that must be encountered. They are undeniably art. They are unquestionably human. But whether they are archives depends not on their age, their origin, or their authenticity. It depends on how we understand memory itself. If memory is data, then the skulls are silent. If memory is pattern, resonance, and relationship, then they are anything but. Perhaps the greatest enigma is not the skulls resting behind glass, but the impulse that keeps drawing us back to them, the human need to believe that something endures beyond flesh, beyond time, beyond forgetting. Civilizations leave behind tools, monuments, and stories. But occasionally they leave behind questions so precisely shaped that they survive every attempt to answer them. And perhaps some creations are not meant to explain the universe, but to quietly reveal the limits of explanation itself. So we return again and again, not to uncover what the crystal skulls know, but to discover what they ask of us. And if the skulls teach us anything at all, it is this: the most enduring legacy of a civilization is not what it remembers, but what it dares to wonder. The inquiry has not ended. It has only just initiated its cosmic upload into eternity. Until our paths cross again, stay curious, stay aware, and keep your eyes on the patterns hidden between myth, history, and the stars. Love, light, and cosmic blessings, Mystic Missy.